Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. The afternoon is sometimes a challenge too after lunch, but I think we'll have some rewarding listening and presentations this afternoon. So we'll start by just actually, can you put that QR code back up just for a moment? Just because I noticed the QR code's low, if everybody would like to access the bios and the abstracts. Yeah, if you want to look at the bios and the abstracts, you can scan the QR code if you haven't already and save it. You already got it there. But for people in the back, it's not easy to scan that. That's why you got easy access. So we're going to pop it up here for just a second. And then very shortly, we're going to have a presentation as is in the schedule. Lawrence Rosenthal, composer, musician, musicologist on Gurdjieff to Hartman music, exploring musical theory. He was going to try to come, but was unable to make it. So he did a recording of his presentation. It's about 17 minutes, I think, as well, too. So we'll work with the time. We are going to try to maybe shorten the panel a little bit since we're starting a few minutes late here, too. But we should still have some time for questions and answers. Okay? Thank you. Yeah.
The question of the influences on Gurdjieff's music is a very interesting one. Obviously, we all know that he traveled all over Asia, really, in the Near East, in Central Asia, and so on, other places, and that he absorbed a huge amount of the sound that was around him all the time. And the degree he was influenced is not always possible to discern, in the sense that he reproduced certain things quite literally, and other things were digested by him in such a way that when they finally emerged, they took on a character which was by now fairly remote from the original model. But I could show you a few interesting examples of the influence. Some of them are more direct, some of them are less direct. For example, he was half Armenian. His mother was Armenian, and Armenian was his mother tongue as a language, and it was also his musical mother tongue. And sometimes it comes forth in his music quite unadorned. To show you how this manifested, I play a little bit of an Armenian folk song, which is called Enzeli. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly. I don't know Armenian, but this is the song. That's the Armenian folk song. Here is Gurdjieff's music for the movement, the 30 Gestures. Now there, the influence is very obvious. This is an absolutely characteristic Armenian rhythm. It appears all through Armenian music. And so it was the most natural kind of thing. It was mother's milk for him. It was the most clear expression. When he was a young boy, 9 years old or something like that, in the city of Kars in Turkey, he went to school at the military cathedral school in Kars, and sang in the church choir, which was quite normal. So another influence on him from very early in his life was the tradition of the Russian Orthodox liturgy. Much of that music involves many syllables which are sung on the same note before going on to the next note. It's part of the style of the music. So here's just an example. This would be sung, of course, not played. So when Gurdjieff writes his Hymn to the Endless Creator, that repeated absolutely typical of Russian Orthodox. It's really amazing because already you begin to feel the mixture of the influences of East and West on the young boy. We all know that he grew up in this absolute melting pot. There were, in the area where he lived, there were Persians and Kurds and Jews and all kinds of Muslim groups and so on. And it was a very rich stew of ethnic variegation. So in with this was the influence of Islam, the influence of Christianity. They all came in. Another aspect of his work, however, which cannot be forgotten, his father was a Cappadocian Greek, and he could speak Greek. I don't know how much, but I think he spoke a considerable amount of Greek. And the entire Greek influence could be also felt in his music. This brings up a whole question, which is extremely interesting, about the fact that with the Greeks there were any number of different modes of music. A mode in our language would be a kind of a scale, and we essentially have two scales now in Western music: the major scale and the minor scale. And most of our music is written in those two scales. But the Greeks had scales which were developed by different Greek peoples around the Hellenic world. And so there was the Ionian mode, and the Dorian mode, and the Phrygian mode, and the Lydian mode, and the Aeolian mode, and the Locrian mode. They were all, and every one was different, and each one of them had its own particular character. But the greatest of the modes, which was always considered, was the Dorian mode. And this was a mode that Gurdjieff knew. And the Dorian mode was considered the most powerful mode because it is the mirror image of the major scale, which was considered the divine scale. This is the mode. And the characteristic thing about that mode is the last two notes have a kind of powerful sound. The interesting thing is that this mode was considered so strong that before Greek soldiers, Dorian soldiers, were sent into battle, music was played for them in this mode because it was thought that it would give them courage. It would reinforce something. The very sound of this mode had an absolute action on a man's internal structure and configuration. So here is the mode again. And the music for this movement contains E with other notes added, and it sounds like this. What power there is in that scale. And it's those modes, especially those two notes. It's so much stronger than, which is much blander. But these two notes so close have a much greater magnetic pull on each other and draw something together almost in the listener, in the middle of his body. One can almost detect the power of that magnetism. A taksim is simply a melodic improvisation. And the taksim was usually performed either by a singer or by a flute or some other wind instrument, possibly by a string instrument, against what is called a drone or a pedal point or an organ point, which is a stationary note that stays constant all through the music. And one of the principles that has been spoken of in this connection is that the drone represents something which remains absolutely constant and unchanging inside. Meanwhile, the melody moves as it were through life, and undergoes all kinds of changes. But the drone never changes. The drone remains constant, and what happens above it in the taksim is always in relation to the drone and only takes on its meaning because it is related to the drone. That's the idea. And Gurdjieff used this form many times. For example, this is one of them. And so on. But this is a form which exists very much in his music. Interestingly, as you have probably noticed, there is no harmony. And in this case, there is not even any rhythm. Because in the East, the only two elements of music that exist are melody and rhythm. They don't know harmony. Harmony was absolutely an invention of the Western world. So most of Gurdjieff's music is harmonic and is written, in fact, for the piano, a completely Western instrument. So the whole question remains, what is this music? Is it Eastern? Is it Western? The fact is that it is both, that it is an extraordinary amalgam of these two strains of musical culture. And in the same way, his teaching has done the same thing. He spoke of the wisdom of the East and blended with the science of the West to produce a new kind of understanding. If I play these two notes are of interval of one tone. If I lower the second one, I get a slightly larger interval. is bigger than, and if I get even bigger, I get an augmented interval, which is the minute I hear this, suddenly it evokes the Orient. In Western music, that interval would be part of what is called the harmonic minor scale. I'm getting technical, and I didn't expect to, but I have to a little bit. For example, that sounds quite normal. And why it's normal is that this is the tonal center. But in the East, that is not the tonal center. It is this that is the note, and everything revolves around it. And this was a group of notes which is obviously very near to Gurdjieff, because many of his pieces begin with that pattern. For example, the great temple hymn number 9. But it's the Armenian song. And anyone who has done the movements of Gurdjieff and his most famous exercise, the first obligatory, which begins, one doesn't really notice what those little notes are. So, what is there about that? Why does it not seem like something that is finished or complete? For example, in other music, we're ending on the tonic note, but so many of Gurdjieff's pieces do not end on the tonic, but rather end on those same notes in reverse. For example, one of his piece called Oriental Song, which ends there. Again, those same 4 notes in reverse order. The whole point is that the piece is ending with a question, which is so characteristic. Sometimes it's a question which is inevitable, and in other music, it's a question which is completely unexpected. But that is part of his sound. Part of his sound is in leaving something unanswered and incomplete, as though it was something to do with the endless cycle of the cosmos, just as the octave system, as it goes up, as Pythagoras discovered, never quite meets. There is always a comma. There's always a space where things are not complete and have to go on and on and on in order to find the completeness which never comes. And one feels this in some of Gurdjieff's music. This is anything but a complete discussion of the sound of Gurdjieff's music, because for that we would need not an afternoon, we'd need a course.